Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AI+HI project. On this week's episode, we'll be tackling the notion of enterprise AI-powered chatbots. As AI-powered enterprise chatbots become reality, the real challenge isn't just adopting new tools. It's rethinking how we create business value. Enterprise chatbots are not simply plug-and-play technology. They're the front end of complex operational systems. Success depends on tackling hidden behind-the-scenes challenges like building relatable and reliable knowledge bases, integrating with legacy workflows, and fostering organizational readiness. Leaders often focus on the hype of enterprise chatbot features while also overlooking the foundational work that drives true impact. This tension between installing technology and solving core business problems is where the most valuable insights emerge. Today, we're very fortunate because I, Alex Alonso, SHRM's Chief Data and Analytics Officer, am joined by Vincent Han, founder and CEO of Mobile Coach, and Markus Bernhardt, principal at Endeavor Intelligence. Together, they bring a wealth of experience in guiding organizations through the complexities of enterprise chatbot adoption. We'll be covering three key areas today: the content and verification challenge that exists in this front, the integration challenge, and then the readiness challenge, which is probably the most telling one of all. Vince, Markus, welcome to the AI+HI project.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, really looking forward to this conversation with both of you.
I really am looking forward to this conversation, and let's dive in right off the bat, right? So in a nutshell, one of the things that we hear about it when thinking about the big picture around enterprise chatbots as a strategic tool, right, is I'd love to hear your thoughts on how distinguishing between these types of chatbots and an AI chatbot might be different, right? What is it that you see is happening? Because I think a lot of us think about these types of chatbots and we immediately think about the chatbot that we get at a large retailer on the website that says, can I help you complete your transaction? Or did you forget something in your cart? How is this different? Because these types of tools aren't that. They're something very different.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that, Alex. I think that with the wave of large language models like ChatGPT or Gemini Copilot that really has flooded the enterprise world in the last 3 years or so, has really informed, I think, a little bit of what you're talking about of expectations with interacting with AI. And when you interact with a publicly available chatbot, like let's just say ChatGPT, I'll use that because it's a very popular one. Its role is to try, its primary priority is to try to answer the user's query, no matter what the query is, and no matter who the user is. And so we're accustomed to that. We can ask we can ask directions, we can ask questions, we can ask it to help us write code, lots of different types of use cases. In an enterprise chatbot, there's still that expectation. Like if I'm an enterprise employee or manager and I'm interacting with a chatbot, I will still expect that main functionality. However, the enterprise chatbot, the enterprise's first priority should be to represent the enterprise appropriately. So whereas like a ChatGPT really cares about, hey, whatever your query is, I'm going to answer the query the best I can. In an enterprise chatbot is first going to say, well, what's my role? Who am I talking to? And what are my directions? Because I am representing this organization. So that's at a very high level how I describe the key difference between what an enterprise chatbot does and what a publicly available chatbot does.
Adding to that, I think that also highlights the business risk associated with that. Because if you go for a straight plug-in into an open chatbot, those are the chatbots that if you ask them to write a poem, they're most likely going to write a poem for you and all those things. So with that freedom and with that extra creativity, let me call it, added on, organizations are in risk of getting some weird answers, some inappropriate answers, some incorrect answers. And to keep that under control, we've seen many reports, can be quite a challenge. So the The enterprise chatbot is just a version that is much more well regulated and follows stricter rules. If you ask an enterprise chatbot to write you a poem, the enterprise chatbot is highly likely going to just say, "Sorry, that's not the scope of this conversation here."
I find it fascinating because as you're describing that, I can picture someone actually trying to interact with the typical AI chatbot that you might find on a website, as opposed to what you're describing with the enterprise level chatbot, and both interactions are so remarkably different. It almost pains me, because I think most users will inevitably find themselves wanting to act like they're doing that with a service chatbot, when in reality it's a very different animal, and that change in human behavior is something that I think we have yet to explore fully in depth. I say that indicting most of my own kind, organizational psychologist, as a profession, but more to follow on that front. So one of the things that I alluded to in the intro was this notion of a tension that exists between the technology and the notion of wanting to adopt technology and implement it, install it, so to speak, and the notion of solving a broader business problem, right? And I think many of our business leaders who listen to the podcast and or who watch the podcast are members of this audience, are thinking specifically about the tension that exists in these types of opportunities as it relates to an enterprise AI chatbot. Can you describe a little bit more about that tension that exists? And then why is it that it's so important for leaders, whether in HR or other areas, focus primarily on understanding this distinction?
Yeah, that's really a core challenge right now that leaders are facing. And from my research, the most useful way to understand this, I think, is through a model that I call the two-wave transformation. So everyone sees the surface wave. It's the visible, noisy activity that we have out there. New tools, new updates. Every week there's news on what's new out there, whether it's Nano Banana recently or whatever it is. Many tools are updating and have flashy marketing. We have the vendor demos, urgent mandate for AI literacy workshops across organizations. It feels like progress, but very often it's just motion. And that's the adopting the technology side of the tension. But the real work, the part that actually solves business problems, is what I call the undercurrent. And this is deeper. The often invisible redesign of how the organization actually functions, how decisions are made, how power is distributed, governance, and how that value is created. That's a much deeper question. And it's often overshadowed by all this commotion of the surface wave. So for me, the tension exists because leaders get trapped managing the surface wave, where so much is going on, while the real transformation, the undercurrent, is happening without sometimes a strategic hand to really guide it. And the necessary shift for leaders is to stop being a tool deployer and to start being more of an organizational architect. And that immediately changes how one approaches a use case, for example, a chatbot implementation, and puts you on a front foot when it comes to the entire thought process of how will this add value, and how will we make this work effectively and in line with what our business needs, respecting and representing our brand.
And it seems that in this case, because what this question addresses in Markus's comment, that's going to be true with any emerging technology. However, in this case, it seems even more sensitive, because I think we all can sense how much AI can disrupt our core businesses. So that feels like the stakes are a lot higher, and which makes that tension feel a lot higher. It also feels higher because the way that AI works is actually quite technical in nature. And so I think on top of the organizational tension, individuals are feeling this tension of, gee, how much do I, as an individual, need to understand how this technology works in order to be useful? And that can be quite an intimidating question to answer if someone's not, technically educated in a formal way. And by the way, I don't think people need to go and all of a sudden get computer science degrees in order to be incredibly useful in an organization. Although if there's a chance, I do think maybe we'll talk about AI literacy during this discussion, that will become I think it's just a really, really important part of navigating the tension.
One of the things that strikes me is there's almost this notion of what we see in this notion of trying to solve the business problem or getting to the point where we're getting at a deeper business problem. And I appreciate the analogy from signal detection theory, right? For those of you that know me or follow this work, I'm a huge believer in signal detection theory, having even cited Raj Parasuraman way back in the initial works, right? But one of the things that strikes me is, how is it that a leader is supposed to be really effective at getting to the point where you are more effective at seeing not just the first wave as you described, right, which is the cool fancy wave, Marcus. It's the getting to the deeper issue of, here is my business issue, right? I think about this in terms of the infinite game and what Simon Sinek always talks about, which is I can fix the one key signal right today, right now, but at the same time, I don't need to lose sight of what is the deeper business issue that is my long-term objective. And so I'd love to hear what you think about how a leader can actually develop that skill.
I think leaders have that skill generally, because leaders will normally have a business objective, an outcome, a KPI in mind in their normal day-to-day. It doesn't matter whether you're in sales or marketing, there are clear KPIs and there's a clear outcome that is required. It just happens to be that with technology, we sometimes put the cart before the horse, and we start with, well, this technology is so interesting, let's see what we can do with it. And that is also correct. I'm someone who always says, please approach technology with two hats on. One is the 6-year-old in Toys R Us who goes, wow, imagine what we could be doing here. And the second one is start with the problem in mind. Now, the start with the problem in mind crowd often overlooks the first approach. And for me, there's a mismatch there, because if you start just with the problem in mind, many great solutions didn't start with an actual problem. Many technologies have just become better, right? The Walkman did the job unbelievably well. We didn't need the disc player, so to speak. There was nothing specific that was such a huge issue there. Or my favorite example is still the shopping list on the Siri or the Alexa, right? The piece of paper with the pencil by the fridge always did an excellent job. We didn't need something to replace that. Do both. Think like a 6-year-old in Toys R Us and go a little bit crazy with your team. Start also with problems in mind. And then when you bring it all together, put your leadership hat on that says, well, what's the most feasible? What's going to have the best impact? For which one are the timescales also good? To see how this works for us, and whether we want to scale it after maybe a smaller project to begin with. And I'm almost just reminding everyone that the normal common sense of business still applies, but that it's not that easy when it comes to innovation, because it is one removed from the day to day, and we're starting to imagine a world that the vision doesn't exactly exist for yet. So that would be my answer.
It's fascinating because I think about the example. You used a great example that really resonates with me, but I always go back to the old example of the space race and the moon, getting to the moon, and the example of how do we develop a pen that allows us to write upside down, right? And if you were to ask NASA, they actually put, science and dollars behind it. But if you were to ask the Soviet Space Agency, what they did was they gave everybody pencils. Right. And so there's both of them achieve the job, but there's a common core business problem, right, that exists there. And sometimes that very solution needs to be thought of in that business problem frame. Right. Now, yeah. The other thing that I think about, and so I'm going to turn it back to some of our core conversations, because I know I threw a curveball there. One of the things that strikes me is people often fall into this notion of a common misconception. Right. And I know we hear about this all the time. You being technologists hear about this, and researchers focused on this. So what are some common misconceptions about enterprise AI chatbots that lead organizations to treat them as simple tech solutions with cool conversational abilities rather than the more complex operational systems that they really are, right? This is an example of what we were talking about earlier, which is treating it like the service chatbot that you have on a website, as opposed to actually thinking about it as this cool set of analytical capability that isn't really taken into account.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one. I think that it is very possible for someone on your team audience, to for almost $0, go find some new AI-driven toy, stand up some sort of proof of concept functionality that could even represent 80% of what a leader or you as a leader envisions for your enterprise. And then the misconception could be, oh, hey, this is easy. We spent 2 hours uploading this PDF and giving it a little bit of a prompt, and this is like almost exactly what we would need. So I think there's a huge difference of standing up some demoware, like a proof of concept to turn on some light bulbs within an organization, and having something production ready that's compliant with regulatory requirements, that has the type of consistency to protect the organization from hallucinations or from incorrect answers, that has the appropriate auditing tools, that can manage access of, hey, who's allowed to access whatever tool or function that we put together. That there's actually quite a bit of rolling up of sleeves to put that together. And maybe the other thing I'll say is that because this is all new technology, we don't know what we don't know. I think another misconception I'll bring out is people will falsely assume that, hey, all the answers to most of the questions that people might have are on our intranet knowledge base. And so we have all the content that we need. You will find as people start interacting with whatever enterprise chatbot you put together that there's actually a lot of work of content that you will need to train the chatbot with that might live in people's brains, institutional knowledge, or maybe there's a PDF that's in the intranet that's 10 years old and no one ever looks at it, except it comes up when someone asks a question that no one was anticipating. So two main misconceptions that I would bring up. The first is that, hey, this is technically easy because I stood up a demo. It's almost what we need. I think that's a misconception. And secondly, hey, we already have all the content that we need. I think those are two that I'll point out.
Yeah, I would add to that. We've all had a friend who's, oh look, I've made myself into GPT, and we kind of go, haha, okay, fine, and we have three sentence conversation with it, and we say, oh, that's quite interesting, that's quite nice, and we all agree that was free. That's not the level we want. And even if you have everything in the intraweb, and you think, yeah, we have a knowledge base here. Imagine you're in customer services for an airline, and someone says, "But I have a discount code here, and I was promised this discount code works, and I should get this free." Is that case covered in your intranet that someone made that story up? And if you have too helpful a chatbot, guess what's going to happen? After 3 rounds of back and forth, right? We've all seen these silly things with GPT, for example. We've seen the people who were confirmed river walkers who have a spiritual identity that goes far beyond the 4 dimensions we probably think we live in, and so yeah, the boundaries there aren't as clear. And also, the other thing is, to curate that content, even if you think you have a good base, there's quite a bit of S&E time involved to check that everything works and to troubleshoot and to red team solutions. So the marketing teams seem to be convincing us that it is plug and play and it's pretty straightforward, and the engine will work pretty quickly. It is still a project that needs quite a lot of diligence and discipline.
I'd love to take a deeper dive now into what you have outlined in your research as well as your core work. And one of the things that I highlight is how accessible this is, right? This series of challenges that you've laid out when organizations are facing what it's like to implement enterprise AI chatbots, right? And these are challenges that go beyond the technology itself and into the operational systems that determine success. But I'd love for you to give me a little bit more description on each. So let's first focus on the content and verification challenge. How can organizations build and maintain a trusted knowledge base for an enterprise AI chatbot in a way that ensures accuracy and reliability? I'll share with you as an example here with SHRM. That's a key challenge that we've worked through or continue to work through as something that is particularly critical to us, because there is this this key brand attribute about SHRM that is being that trusted authority in everything that we do, and that's rooted in the data that we put out in the world, the content that we put out in the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how it is that an organization really should tackle this particular challenge.
My experience working on a lot of enterprise chatbot projects is that I have heard a lot of organizations say, well, we've got all this content, we've got all these articles, and we have all these podcast transcripts and video transcripts. Let's just put everything in the chatbot. And what I found is that you have to be careful with that sensibility, because going back to something Markus highlighted, step back and say, what problem are we trying to solve? Even with an enterprise chatbot, how are we trying to solve this problem? And so I think the content strategy needs to come from what content do we need to solve our problem? We don't need to put in the whole kitchen sink. More than likely, whatever those content artifacts are, they weren't built with AI in mind. When someone wrote like a policies and procedures manual or a thought leadership article 3 or 4 years ago, they weren't thinking, gee, how is a neural network going to ingest this? And so it does require some manual curation. We're in the period, maybe 5 years from now, everything will be completely automated. But in today's day and age, when we're relying on content artifacts that were built not with AI in mind, it does take some human curation, create a workflow that includes evaluating content that's working backwards from what do we want our enterprise chatbot to be able to address. And remember, with enterprise chatbots, you can build in guardrails that say that tell the user, hey, as this enterprise chatbot, these are the things that I'm trained to answer. And if you ask me something outside of that, here are some resources for you to go. And that takes the pressure off the organization to feel like you have to answer everything. Make sure your enterprise chatbot does really well what the intent is. And so you build a content library, you build a workflow for it. And the last thing I'll say about the content is that in organizations, content is it's dynamic, it's going to change. And so you have to build in your workflow a sensibility of, hey, this article is great right now, but a year from now, is the content going to change? And if the answer is yes, you need to make sure it gets swapped out and the chatbot has the most up-to-date information. So it's a whole new workflow, a whole new set of skills that organizations have to identify and adopt to make the content correct.
And I've seen quite a few integrations where exactly that has become a problem relatively quickly, is version logs. There's operating procedures and they get updated, and we just upload the newest and again the newest and again the newest, and we think that the LLM will be able to differentiate which one is the newest and what's changed and what is no longer available. Anyone who's tried this, the moment you start uploading the third or fourth iteration of a document and you don't get rid of what was there before, you'll run into the one or other point of confusion. And the trick is that the big open chatbots, they convince us with some of the benchmarks that they achieve that there's lots of thinking going on in the background and they're actually intelligent. And we have to remind ourselves that those open chatbots only seemingly are that clever because they've been trained on all human text we've ever created. And they can continue a conversation really well. But when it comes to very specific subtasks, like being asked about a standard operating procedure and assuming that thing knows that there's versions, and a new version will mean the old one is obsolete and it just works around that, will fall flat relatively quickly.
At the bottom of all public LLMs, and ChatGPT is no different. At the bottom, it'll have a disclaimer, right, that says, hey, ChatGPT can make mistakes. Please check your work. That's a nice disclaimer for them. And I think organizations need to ask themselves, can we afford to have the same disclaimer? Can we afford for our enterprise chatbot to make mistakes? And for a lot of organizations, the answer is no. We can't afford that. And so that requires a whole level of rigor around the content that maybe an open AI doesn't have to worry about because it has that disclaimer. It can just ingest everything in any way that it wants because it can kind of get away with not needing to be accurate all the time. It's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a massive difference. One thing that I also think about is the role that knowledge management or content management and subject matter expertise governance play in this process. And I've seen organizations trip themselves up specifically in the notion of subject matter expert kind of governance. It takes me back to my days actually as a federal contractor here in the U.S., focusing on knowledge management and really that subject matter expertise governance when it relates to even some of the work that I used to do supporting the Federal Aviation Administration. And I think specifically about some of the things that we actually treated as hurdles in many ways. I mean, I remember just the notion of having subject matter expertise in the way that we actually governed the knowledge content components of what we were training for, what was not even then an LLM or anything related to a bot, but rather for training air traffic controllers. I almost think about how that applies today. Where do you see that people are successful in applying that type of governance? Is it really effective if you are locking things down as much as possible, or what is the level of governance that you see people really putting forth when it comes to this type of work?
Well, I think that it's my honest answer. This might sound like a cop out, but I think that it's too early. I think it's too early because these projects are just still so new. So I would say that rather than governance, it is, have you empowered the team that is putting together the chatbot to really be like the supervisor or I think it's good to think of, hey, an enterprise chatbot needs a manager. It needs accountability. So who is the chatbot supervisor, and are they empowered to manage the content that's behind it? And I've seen projects where, whoever's been input, hey, Alex, go put this chatbot together, but you're not empowered to get the content, to edit the content, to, there's some maybe turf battles around who owns the content. Those types of things can really be an impediment on successful chatbots. And so rather than governance, maybe that is a governance issue of really empowering the team to own the content, have access to the content, and to really drive the content workflow that it needs to be successful.
I love that, Vince. And you could have so easily given us the theoretical perfect answer when we all know that the reality is a little bit muddier, let's say.
So let's jump into the integration challenge next, right? What are the biggest hurdles in integrating an enterprise AI chatbot into an organization's legacy systems and workflows? Where is it that you see it really being huge hurdles?
Well, maybe simply put, is that a lot of the systems that we have in our enterprises are quote unquote old, and they didn't anticipate chatbot integration. I think there are two levels of integration. One is on a user interface perspective, can we put a chatbot inside our web application, which is a legacy system? And the second is there's data within our legacy systems, like our HR systems, that it would be great for the chatbot to be aware of. So for example, I can ask the chatbot, hey, how many PTO days do I have left? Right? That requires the chatbot to be able to query an HR system and to deliver an answer. And so because those things are relatively new, hopefully our web applications have robust APIs. As we all know, some systems have better APIs than others. And so those are some of the challenges of navigating integration points of systems that didn't envision chatbot integration when they were built.
And just out of curiosity, can you share some examples? And Markus, I asked this of you as well. What are some examples of steps or actions that really contribute to the successful integration, right? And I ask that in large part because I always wonder, the purist in me wants to know what is it that leads to failure, but the purist in me is really asking, what is it that is a successful integration process when thinking about this?
Well, I don't think the answer is very profound. I think it's quite simple. It's strong communication. It's putting together, here is our chatbot scope. Here's the audience. Here's the purpose. And in order to fulfill the purpose for its intended audience, here are the core features and functionality. And to deliver that, who are our internal stakeholders? Let's put together a project plan. So maybe that's all to say to reinforce what we talked about earlier. You can't just assign one intern to put this together because they were able to whip something up in 2 hours using a custom GPT. So I think it's just good old-fashioned, strong communication, strong project management.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, for me, AI literacy is always a piece there. Because in addition to the strong communication, the leadership team, the developing team, the team that has the vision, as well as the user, ideally, if it's an internal piece, especially, um, they need to understand the boundaries, knowing what the tool is for, what it's not for, what its knowledge limits are, and how you should be interacting with it. Yeah, we see confusion there. For example, when we look at the Copilot suite, people say, "Well, I have Copilot in so many different areas, and each of those Copilots interacts differently with me. The one in Outlook, I can't ask it for a recipe." And so people are confused, and that is also in the general scope of all those tools that are being deployed right now. And so having a clear understanding of, what's the difference between an open chatbot and an enterprise chatbot? What are our expectations? What are the boundaries here? And being able to visualize that better will also allow you to better roll it out, set expectations, and increase usage rather than immediate disappointment. If I give an enterprise chatbot to a friend and they want a poem written and the bot says no, thank you, there might be an immediate, well, this isn't as good as what my friend whipped up the other day, right? So expectation and AI literacy, I think, are key.
It's fascinating because I think back to some of the research that we've done here at SHRM. We actually recently released a report called AI Adoption, and really from what was adoption to empowerment. And one of the things that we found in particular was that 1 in 4 working professionals felt like they were satisfied with the level of AI literacy that was the training and the skilling that was being provided through the workplace, but only 1 in 4. The overwhelming majority was looking for more. And so I think about exactly what you're describing, and it makes me think of that integration challenge. But then it also makes me think specifically about this next piece, which is the readiness challenge. And what is it that AI literacy means in the context of these types of tools, right? What does it mean in the implementation process? How is it that organizations actually should tackle this? And I ask this on behalf of what is close to 80,000 CHROs and executives, 280,000 of them, plus the larger 6 million or so HR professionals on the planet.
Well, with AI readiness, I would say the key driver is really finding valuable use cases in your personal life. And that will drive a very natural AI literacy. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to go sign up for an in-depth technical course. I think there's a lot of training out there that's appropriate for your role if you're in a non-technical role. And I certainly want to encourage that. But I think core literacy comes from usage. And not just ChatGPT, but other AI-empowered tools. And when we find genuine use in our own personal life, and I know we're short on time because we could talk forever about this great topic, that, in my experience, is that accelerates AI literacy when you're really relying on technology to fulfill, personal life, time management, coaching. How do I deal with my teenager? How do I deal with the stress that I get when I'm stuck in my car during this awful commute? Those types of things will work wonders in terms of envisioning how this technology can be applied at work.
I think that's almost a perfect answer. I would only add, we also maybe need to get used to the evolution from reactive to proactive tools. The open chatbots we interact with, everything Vince has just said is, if you ask questions, you will get some form of answers. But we're not expecting any bot to reach out proactively to us, and either because it's on a schedule of check-ins or because it can anticipate something. So that will also be part of that AI literacy piece, for example, that when you're looking at a managed chatbot, there's much more that this chatbot can do when it comes to proactive outreach and preempting needs. So there's a lot still to be learned.
So I'll ask another question just as a quick follow-up to that. Do you think that there is any part of the readiness challenge that also works with familiarizing people as far as what the data layer is, and how does that make people more effective when thinking about how they would use these types of tools?
I would say that goes hand in hand. As people work more with tools like a chatbot, they become better in their mind at thinking of which problems do I use it for and how do I use it. And I think this is also a crucial element to understand. There's been research recently, and quite a bit of it, saying it doesn't matter how you prompt, you pretty much get the same outcome. And I would caveat that. I would say what we need to keep in mind is that a beginner will use it for the wrong things. And if you're using it for the wrong things, yes, it doesn't matter how you prompt and how you ask your question. But if you're already an advanced user and you know this is a really good place to use it, and I've got some resources and I wanted to put this thing together and I've got an idea, well, you've just already given me your prompt because you have this good idea. And so when I look at that research, I'm thinking, well, the advanced user has the better idea already and has already pieced 2 or 3 things together. That equates to the prompt. So kind of it still does matter how you interact with it, but an advanced user will pick better use cases where something like a large language model or a chatbot can perform at its strength. And that is another thing that I think will just come over time, right? There we need to let our people grow and experiment. And yes, absolutely, with the better understanding, there will be a better understanding of how the data governance might have to work. Although you should also bring a technical team in for that. That's not something people just learn on the side.
So I think we've got time for one more question, and we'll go to the rapid fire roundup here if you're open to it, just for a little bit of fun. And I'll ask you one question if you're both ready for it. Let's see here. What's one word that sums up the biggest challenge of implementing enterprise AI chatbots in business? And I'm going to ask you to stick to that one word.
Discipline.
Okay. Vince?
Persistence.
Persistence. All right. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here and ask you specifically, what is the most surprising benefit you've seen from a successful enterprise AI chatbot adoption? Give me 20 seconds, each of you.
I think the most surprising thing I have seen is, and I hope people haven't walked away thinking, oh, this is going to be too hard. I know that we have painted a picture of rigor but the tools are remarkable in terms of the promise of the automation behind AI and how it can free your team up to focus on the business. And so I think that's probably shouldn't be a surprise, but I think when people get to the end of a project and deployment and seeing an AI chatbot work effectively for your organization, it is a wonderful surprise because, a lot of our IT implementations that we've been through sometimes never even see the light of day. And so when you can put it together and lean on AI to do all that automation, boy, your organization is going to be way ahead.
And Markus, same question to you.
I would say timeframes. I think most people will be surprised that if they've done their homework and they've got a pretty good idea and they're guided by the right people in this process, they'll be very surprised that when they heard from us that it's not plug and play, that it is still quite an efficient swift process at times to get to a really, really good outcome. And so I think that's the flip side of the coin, is that people often are surprised. Yes, once I've done my homework, actually, it can be a pretty straightforward process, and deployment can be just around the corner.
And then the last question, I'm going to cheat a little bit again. One piece of advice you'd offer a CHRO when thinking about that readiness challenge in particular. Very brief. Give me one piece of advice. Markus, we'll start with you.
For CHRO, depending on the size of the organization and depending on how technologically advanced you are, the best piece of advice is mirror with what you're doing, your company culture. As a CHRO, you're internal facing, and in a company that's all about human touch, you don't want an interview bot. If someone through their interview process has gone through 6 interviews with bots and then lands in an organization that values the human touch over everything, then there's a bit of a mismatch there. So I would say whatever the CHRO is trying to do, it has to fit in with the organization and the culture, because the tools offer so many different routes. It's very easy to be aligned. It's also very easy to not be aligned.
And Vince, take us home.
All right. So I would imagine most CHROs, if not all, have have agreed to the premise that AI is going to affect their business in a significant way. So my advice would be, look at your calendar. Is the way that you're spending your time aligned with the rigor and the work and the preparation you need in order to implement, utilize strategically, use AI in the way that you envision it transforming your business and your culture in the next 12, 36 months.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Markus and Vincent for sharing their experiences and insights with us. I know our audience values them and cherishes this type of wisdom. Thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time on the AI+HI project.
Did you know our podcast is only one part of the AI+HI project? We also host an annual event featuring visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR. Plus, we publish a weekly newsletter that includes topical articles and the latest research from SHRM, all to help you stay ahead of the trends. To sign up, just make your way to shrm.org/AI+HI. And you can also follow SHRM on social media for even more clips and stories. Like, share, and tell us how you're innovating towards a brighter future.
SHRM.